So the 5 stars for version 5.2 have been announced, so let us go through each and every single one of them to see if they are worth your Primogems or should you skip for the upcoming versions. So for the first half, we have Chasca and a Lyney rerun with an Auroron rates up, while the second half we have Zhongli and Neuvillette. So if we start off with Chasca, right? So she has a very cool kit. Her elemental skill lets her ride a massive freaking gun, which I find to be extremely comical, and when I first saw it, it reminded me of those wuxia novels where you would have like cultivators thing, and they would be riding these swords to show how good they are at that kind of thing. But if you know, you know. So the normal attack that she does in this state is essentially useless. It does Anemo damage and it's very minimal, so you don't really want to use that. While her charge attack lets her take aim and mark enemies. And while that happens, she will essentially load up to 6 bullets, and after she fully loads up, she releases the bullets. She'll fire homing projectiles that hits all the targets that are marked. For every Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo teammates you have, she has a chance of converting those bullets into that said element. From what we could see on the live stream for the gameplay footage, it seems like up to 4 bullets out of 6 can be converted. Now, this whole mechanic is interesting for a few reasons. The first reason is that she can actually trigger reactions, well, potentially trigger this, like Vaporize or Melt, which are really good amplifying reactions. So this would actually boost her overall damage by quite a lot for every charge attack she does. And the second thing is that it will actually affect her gearing a bit. According to a few theory crafters I've been seeing in terms of their videos, like Jay Stern, Jeff, or the Genshin Scientist, a damage goblet is not recommended to her depending on what team you run due to how much damage her converted shells do. By logic, you would always think to put Anemo damage goblet for an Anemo DPS, but due to how her mechanic works, something like an attack goblet can actually do quite comparable damage to other elemental damage goblets. So essentially, her gearing is very similar to Raiden because an attack goblet is actually recommended over the regular elemental goblet, which I think is pretty good because that means that you don't actually have to farm for an onset elemental goblet. You can just get a double crit attack goblet that you have in your account that's been sitting there for a very long time, and you're very likely to have a 40 CV goblet somewhere. So that's honestly really nice. Her elemental burst works very similar to her skill with the bullet conversion, where 2 bullets will be converted based on how many Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo members you have. Although the difference between her skill and her burst is that all the bullets in her burst will be converted into the element, while her charge attack still has 2 Anemo bullets left over. And once again, based on what I've seen in the TC side and I look at the immersion values over on certain websites, you basically don't really want to run her on any Anemo partners. Her converted shells have a 2 to 3 times more multipliers compared to a pure Anemo-like shell, so you definitely do not want to run like a second Anemo unit in your team, because that will actually lead to a pretty sizable DPS loss. Now, I'm unsure how much better Faruzan is going to be with her. From what I saw, I think she will kind of get some sort of damage bonus, but I think we'll have to wait for release to figure out whether Faruzan could be something that is usable on her. But that also means that for non-Faruzan or non-C6 Faruzan owners, you can run her without Faruzan. Now, she is pretty cool, works very similar to Molani, and it seems like Natlan DPS are very single target heavy, although the one common point between her and Molani is that they can still do damage against multi-target situations, albeit it's going to be less versus a single target situation. Her weapon options, however, are quite perplexing. So her charge attack shot isn't considered like a regular projectile like Ganyu's charge attack, so weapons like Slingshot and Aimer's Bow won't be that good on her since the passive is essentially useless. And a lot of the other bow options tend to have like crit rate, which is a little bit difficult to build around due to the Obsidian Codex artifact giving you already 40% crit rate, and Chasca also ascends for crit rate. So by default, it's very easy for you to overcap on crit rate if you intend to run like a crit bow on top of the Codex artifact set. And in terms of her F2P options, there's only 2 real F2P weapons, which is the Fontaine Craftable, the Song of Stillness, and Hamayumi. Hamayumi can work in certain teams if you don't actually use her burst so that you can amplify her charge attack bonus. Meanwhile, the Song of Stillness requires you to just receive a form of healing, which might actually not work in a lot of different teams because you do need to get healing to benefit from the passive. And most of the other 4-star bows are generally stat sticks, and most of the 5-star bows are generally good on her. As long as you don't overcap on crit rate, I think it's going to be pretty good. And of course, her own bow is going to be her best in slot. Personally, I think she's going to be really fun, and I will be pulling for her myself due to my own preference. And from what I've seen, I think her damage is like an average 60, 70k like DPS in some of the teams, but I think the numbers, I couldn't really find any like proper compiled calcs anywhere, at least from Google or Reddit and such. So I think she's going to be decent. She's going to be on a similar performance to maybe Kinish. I don't know if she's going to be as good as Molani, but she is not going to be a DPS that lets you down. Now for the next character, we have Lyney. So I don't actually have him in my account, so everything I'm about to say is based on second-hand information. From the team's database that I saw over on GC Sim, his average DPS in single target situations seems to average out at about 70k, which is actually kind of good. Even when you consider that a lot of these simulations are done with F2P weapon options like the Fontaine Craftable or Prototype Crescent. Although his gameplay is definitely not going to be for everyone. Charge attack bow characters feel very slow in general, and from my experience of trying him out in his own quests and all the different trial runs that he's been on, I personally prefer Ganyu due to her charge attack having a bit of AoE, so she is a bit more forgiving for anyone with a skill issue or who has a hard time aiming, especially with how fast some of the enemies are. And I personally consider him to be Amber Pro Max. The playstyle is very similar, they both have a taunt, they're both Pyro Bow. The damage is obviously going to be leaning more towards the Lyney side, but if you can stomach the charge attack playstyle and that's something that you're into, I think he might be the character for you. And if I get lucky on my Chasca pulls, I might consider spending some pulls on some multis on him, but ideally I will try to save all my primos for Mavuika, which may actually be out by version 5.3. Now, the next unit, we have Zhongli. Zhongli, the Geo Archon, the strongest shield in the game, and that has remained undisputed even up until this day, 4 years after release. Like at this point, with how many reruns he has been getting, everyone and their mother and their grandmother would at least have one copy of him in their account. His super strong shield allows for comfy gameplay, which is really great if you suffer from a little bit of skill issue for, playing the game. And it also makes the game a bit more playable for some characters with little to no interrupt resist, such as Lyney and Ganyu. Meanwhile, everything else about his kit, it simply just exists. The pillar attack range is too short to consistently trigger tenacity, so you require a bit of proper placement, just like how the contractors would be building a house. His burst animation, as cool as it is, takes way too much time, which leads to an overall kind of decent DPS, but not really like all that worth building. I've tried building him for like with Staff of Homa, Crown his burst, level 90, and try to do like a 2 Noblesse, 2 Archaic Petra for a burst DPS Zhongli build. And while the number does go big, you can hit 150, maybe 200k if you have more investment on your Zhongli and your supports. It's not going to be that much better than a lot of other DPS out there, and it's something that you really have to invest into if you really want it to be worth it. But at the very minimum, he is at least the best rock breaker in the game. So if you're into collecting crystals, collecting all these ores, just slap on Zhongli, hold E, and grab all that loot. And also, I forgot to mention, enemies near him when his shield is up does get a 20% rush rate, so that is a quite nice supportive buff that he's able to provide for your DPS. And for the final character, we have Neuvillette, the Hydro Sovereign, the young dragon. Honestly, do I really need to say more? The game has been out for like, well, we're already almost in like, it's probably been over a year since he's been released in 4.1 with Risley. And honestly, if you really want to win the game, just pull for Neuvillette. He will literally make any difficult content or any sort of content in the game essentially trivial, even at F2P or low spender investment. And the more you invest into him, the stronger he's going to get. And he is the character that is basically the definition of power creep if you want to compare to how good a new DPS is. If D-Loop is the floor to see how good a DPS is, well, maybe back then, but maybe not nowadays, Neuvillette is the absolute ceiling. He's easy to use, he does a lot of damage, he has amazing AoE with his freaking charge attack, and he has the ability to heal, which leads to really good self-sustain. His early constellations are all really good. C1 to C3 is just absolutely amazing. Massive damage increase, and even his own like weapon Term of Eternal Flow is also going to add like even more damage to him, which means the ceiling is going to go higher and higher the more Primogems you invest into him. Although at C0, he is quite vulnerable to stagger unless you are a bit good at keeping your distance. So the only way to really tackle this is to either like pull for Constellation 1, get the damage increase and get that stagger, that interrupt resist for a little bit, or just pull for Zhongli or slap on a Zhongli if you already have him and just don't even think about playing the game. Now, obviously his weapon is pretty great, and a lot of his F2P options, or at least the 4-star options, fall decently behind, like the Sacrificial Jade, Until R5, and then of course the Prototype Amber being the Mondstadt craftable. But overall, his damage is still pretty good, and right now the game has not really had a difficulty spike in terms of any sort of endgame content. We do have the recent event with the trials thing where the hardest difficulty you can fight like the hardest boss, but if you have Neuvillette with a good amount of support like Furina, Kazuha, and Shilonen, you're honestly gonna have a pretty easy time, assuming that you don't die of course. But if you do have constellations or you have a shield, honestly any content in the game just becomes trivial in the face of the Hydro Dragon. So I think that's my overall thoughts over the current banner. It's quite stacked for a lot of people. For those who don't have Zhongli, I think Zhongli is going to be their gateway to comfy gameplay. And for anyone who really has any sort of difficulty in dealing with super tough enemies, Neuvillette is going to be the character that is going to help you basically make everything and turn the game into an absolute joke. Difficulty is not an option for him, it is just a suggestion. Now, Chasca and Lyney, I don't have much information of Lyney, so that's really up to personal preference. Chasca is also up to personal preference, but she is going to be the cool new toy, being the latest Natlan DPS that we have right now. Anyways, what do you guys think about the banners for 5.2? Which 5 stars are you guys interested in pulling for? If you have any sort of thoughts and opinions, feel free to leave it down in the comments section below. Hopefully this video helped you make your decision on whether you should pull or skip for these characters. Otherwise, that is it for the video. This is Ethereal, signing off. Peace!